Tricks on. I know, I was
No,
that 8 of us. It was just tricks.
All people usually look like. It's just me. So we have it.
Find your seats, please. Find your seats.
Yeah, that's the second time on this trip. That's
I have a couple of those.
How dare they?
I know.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it that way.
I think they'll stay together.
Ready to start?
I got it.
Yeah, fine. That was.
Mary. Alrighty, we ready to start?
Yeah.
I'm not enthused. Are we ready to start?
Yeah.
Alrighty, it's better. Well, good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you to the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix, your humanist oasis here in the Valley. I'm your host and president, Chris Wojno, and today's events are brought to you by the generosity of our paying members and donations, as well as the hard work and dedication of our volunteers, and, of course, our speaker. If you have a cell phone, if you could please silence it before we start, that would be great. We are going to dinner afterwards. I've got a reservation over at the Brass Tap, which is about a mile that-a-way-ish in the Riverview. If you don't know where it is, come talk to me and I will point it out, or you just follow the heathen train to dinner. I have some quick announcements here. We have our Philosophy Under the Influence group, which is pretty awesome. I was talking to you about it before, and it's always a lot of fun. We got at least 24 people coming pretty regularly, and it's a lot of fun. And I don't know what they're talking about tomorrow, but it is tomorrow night at 6:30. Yeah, right here. We have a new event coming up. It's called Let's Geography. So one evening a month, we will discuss a country somewhere in the world, located on a map, and share everything we have been able to find out about it. There's so much to learn: people, river, places, language, cities, mountains, food, customs. You get the idea. They will teach and learn together. Then we'll choose a country for the next time. We're starting with Bhutan, and that's this Thursday night, March 22nd, 6:30 p.m., also right here. So we're hoping that goes pretty well. Question?
Wasn't Wednesday night?
I hear Thursday the 22nd.
Can you hear all right? Can you hear all right? Sure.
And then, of course, our next Sunday speaker meeting, which is our flagship events, we're having James Fuchs, our friend James, who was on the board last year. He's coming back to talk to us about what moments sparked the most transformation and growth in your life, and what lessons can be learned about humanism, trans identity, and growth in community. So he's going to be talking about his experiences here and how humanism can change the world for the better for trans individuals. That's going to be this next upcoming Sunday on the 25th, 10 a.m. Breakfast is at 9. Bring your appetites and your good conversations. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our speaker. You all know David G Mcafee. He's a religious studies graduate, journalist, and author of The No Sacred Cows. He's investigating myths, cults, and the supernatural, as well as Atheist Answer, or he's also the author of Atheist Answers, Rational Responses to Religious Questions, The Book of Gods, The Belief Book, and Mom, Dad, I'm an Atheist, The Guide to Coming Out as a Non-Believer and Disproving Christianity and Other Secular Writings. So I think you have a bit of a new story on that
one. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you to the rest of you for coming out. I appreciate it. This is my third time in Arizona now, and I really love the state. So we just came from Flagstaff, though, so you guys have some competition there. Just So I'd like to start out just by gauging the room with a question. How many of you have heard of Maria Sibylla Merian? Anyone? All right. That's actually not too surprising. She was born in 1647 at a time when women were considered inferior and incapable of scientific pursuits. I know what you guys are thinking. Nobody would ever think that today. That's completely outdated thinking, right? No. So they thought that the rigorous life of a researcher would interfere with the domestic duties of women. And so she wanted to become a scientist, but she became an artist instead, and she did these wonderful drawings over here. But it was more than art, and it's because she had the mind of a scientist. So at just 13 years old, she started drawing plants and insects, including silkworms. And she ended up becoming the first person to record the life cycles of butterflies and moths, and probably one of the first ecologists. A lot of people argue that she was one of the first people to actually take on that mantle. She didn't have any formal scientific training at all, but she did have curiosity, and her work still influences scientists today. Not just in the art community, where I'm sure she's known as well, but in science, they look to her to explain when we first discovered how these insects transformed. My point is that we can all learn to think like scientists, and we should try to do so, because science is our best way to determine what's real and what's not. And in her case, she had to do it in her way because that was the times, that's what she had to do. And I think we can do the same, regardless of where we are in this world. We can all research, we can all look at data, we can all draw conclusions from that data. That doesn't mean we have to request proof for every single thing anybody says at any time, because that would be annoying. But it does mean we can use the principles of science in our daily lives to get closer to the truth. And the fact is that we all use science already in our daily lives, even though a lot of people don't realize it. I just think we should do it more and more often. We've been using science every day since we were babies. These are the basic steps of the scientific method. Make an observation, form a hypothesis, perform the experiment, analyze the data, report your findings, and invite others to reproduce the results. As you can see, this baby is going to poison this baby here, but it's in the name of science, so it's all right. It's completely okay. No babies were harmed in the making of that cartoon, probably. So I, like her, am not a scientist. My only college degrees are in English and religious studies. But I do have a few things needed to do science. I have curiosity, I have knowledge of the scientific method, passion for the truth, and, pretty importantly, the ability to admit when I'm wrong. So 6 years ago, I used those qualities to embark on an adventure. I decided to look beyond the religions that I had been studying in school for years and branch out to investigate all myths and all superstitions and basically all false beliefs. And I did that for a couple reasons. Number one, all false claims have the potential to cause harm. And a lot of people push back on this and say that a lot of false beliefs are harmless because they know somebody who has a harmless false belief, and that's completely fine, and I don't argue with that. But they all have the potential to cause harm, because whether you believe, most recently in the field of false medicines, I've discovered these people who drink and use turpentine enemas to cure, quote, any disease. They think that they have bacteria in their body that causes all disease. It causes cancer, it causes AIDS, it causes everything. And so if you drink or otherwise insert turpentine, then it will kill those worms and you'll be cured. And so that's obviously at the extreme end of the spectrum of dangerous false beliefs. There are people who are dying, and I infiltrated their group on Facebook, and I spoke to some of them, and I saw some of their posts, and somebody posted, I've been doing this for 3 or 4 weeks, and there's red in my stool. Can you guys tell me what's going on? And people were commenting, oh, that means it's working. That's the bacteria dying in you. I'm like, that's your intestinal lining. So on the other end of the spectrum, you have something as simple as like a lucky rabbit's foot, where it might not interfere with your daily life, but it still is a false belief that could cause you to act differently than you otherwise would have. And that's where the potential for harm comes in. So the second reason is that studies have shown, and I'm sure you guys have seen these polls over the last few years, that belief in religions is waning. It's going down pretty substantially. In almost every survey that I've seen, it's shown a drastic increase in the people, they're called nuns, who don't identify with any religion or religious group. And that's a great thing. It's something to be celebrated. It's probably partially a result of the age of information and access to online and the internet. But there's something that is contradicting that as well, and that's that those same studies show a rise in belief in supernatural concepts that aren't related to religion. So it's actually more of a rejection of dogma and strict doctrine than it is of false beliefs or supernatural beliefs. And so people will be more likely to hang on to something like ghosts or psychics, and maybe less likely to go to Catholic church and go through their extensive rituals. So in my new book, In No Sacred Cows, I look into all sorts of false beliefs. Over that 6 years, I researched everything from 9/11 conspiracy theories to Scientology, and everything in between. And I was mentioning earlier the Scientology aspect. I'll just go over that one more time before I move on, but that was one of the most fun things because I took a test at the Scientology Center. I took an IQ test there. I also interviewed the great-grandson of L. Ron Hubbard, who founded the Church of Scientology. We also investigated a real-life Scientology bunker for nuclear war, for when there's a nuclear incident. They have a bunker where Tom Cruise and John Travolta have their own little barracks in there. We went there and they did not like us going at all. So that was really fun. But some of the other things I touch on are ghosts, spirits, and specters. To investigate ghosts, a lot of people would just go to a haunted house and, okay, I investigated the ghosts, and I did go to haunted houses. But I like to look at the underlying root causes of a lot of beliefs in ghosts. And some of those things include sleep paralysis, which I've had experience with. Has anyone experienced that, sleep paralysis? Okay, yeah, that's about the percentage in the world that gets it. Basically, what happened to me was I was sitting up in bed thinking that I'm fully awake, when in actuality I was in a state between fully awake and asleep. But I felt fully awake. I could see everything completely normal and feel everything. And my door started, the door handle started moving a little bit, and I was like, okay, somebody thinks this is their apartment, all right. And then all of a sudden, a ghost opened the door, and yeah, a ghost didn't go through the door, opened it. And that didn't give me any, that should have been my first clue. But she was just like you would expect a ghost to look. She had long black hair, it looked like she just got out of a well, it looked like something from The Grudge or The Ring. She was wet and blue, dead face, and floating towards me. And I was paralyzed with what I thought was fear. I thought that I was so terrified that I couldn't move a muscle. And after a couple of minutes, she suddenly disappeared, and I was able to move again, and I jumped up, and I went to my computer, and I think I Googled ghost paralyzed. And the first thing that popped up was sleep paralysis, which is a condition that causes hallucinations during that state. And it actually manifests itself in many ways. People think that aliens are coming to abduct them, or even in some cases have sexual relationships with them. They think that ghosts are coming to abduct them, or people do weird stuff with their supernatural beliefs. But this is something that's pretty common, and it manifests itself in different ways. There's also grief hallucinations, which most people end up experiencing. I think it's something like 60% of people at some point in their life will experience a grief hallucination where you've lost somebody you love, you've lost somebody who's close to you, and your mind can't cope with that, and you end up seeing either you see them, spot them in a crowd, or you feel their hand on your shoulder, something familiar, you smell them even. That's an evolutionarily explained phenomenon where our brains kind of adjust to that death, that loss, by using that coping mechanism. So there's also things like infrasound, that's an undetectable sound that can cause you to feel like you're being watched. It can cause you to feel, they call it a feeling of presence or a feeling of dread, where you're just walking around and all of a sudden all of your hair stands on end and you get a tingle up your spine and people are like, ghosts. And it could be a sound that's imperceptible to you, but your body feels it regardless. So I also talk about psychics and other so-called seers. And a lot of people believe in psychics, and most of them have personal experiences with people who claim to be mediums. And it's a tough belief to crack because a lot of people believe in it so fervently. So I interviewed a lot of psychics. I interviewed celebrity psychics, including some who worked with Ellen DeGeneres, who worked with Miley Cyrus, people who are well known for doing this, and paid $400 an hour to interview them for the book, so that's fun. But after I did all that, and I kind of learned their mechanisms of cold reading and hot reading and everything that they did, I became a medium myself, and that's me up there. I was at Venice Beach. My name was Suro the Seer, and Suro is Horus backwards. Nobody noticed. That was actually a really interesting experience because I went just to see if I could convince anyone really that I was a psychic, and I ended up with about a 90% success rate, people claiming that I told them something that I had to have known through some psychic mechanism. And I think a lot of that isn't to do with me being good at it, but just people, it's called the Forer effect. They are likely to rate generalized statements as extremely relevant to their life. So you're like, Oh, there's a money issue going on. Does anyone feel a money issue going? Okay, she does. All right, so tell me about, And you can read people pretty quickly, and it's something that you can learn, and it's something that a lot of people do learn, and then they take advantage of others in that way. Alien intervention is another one I talk about a lot in the book, and that's a tough one because alien's a divisive topic. I happen to believe that it's statistically likely, that alien life, maybe intelligent alien life, exists elsewhere. And so it's hard for me to write about this topic because people assume I'm telling them that aliens can't exist, and I'm not. I'm just saying we don't have evidence that they visited us here on Earth yet. It's also pretty narcissistic to think that they would, considering how normal our planet is in the grand scheme of things when you consider all the other planets that exist. So I actually I interviewed one of the most prominent skeptics on the topic of aliens, and I also did some in-depth research on the ancient alien phenomenon or theory, the ancient astronaut theory, and where they believe that our ancestors were so dumb and ignorant that they couldn't figure out how to stack blocks themselves and needed alien intervention to do so. So there's no evidence of that either, but I also delve into Roswell and the source of some of these prominent alien beliefs that exist very strongly still today. And again, that's another belief that's growing, that's not going down like the religious beliefs are. Faith healing and alternative medicine I talked about a little bit earlier, but people don't realize what all is included in that. I talk about everything from acupuncture to homeopathy to traditional faith healing to exorcisms, which people are always surprised by that, but it's really the first form of faith healing. It was when somebody was so messed up, usually mentally, and they just walk up and give them a shot of endorphins and touch their head, and now you're healed for the next 10 to 12 minutes until that wears off and start to realize that you're still seriously mentally ill. That's a problem that still exists today. In fact, they're performing more exorcisms than ever right now. They're saying that, especially throughout Europe, they're saying the demand for exorcisms is just so great. And I think in my head, that's just the demand for mental health care is so great, and you're just treating it with exorcisms. It's pretty ridiculous. But the most interesting thing about the faith healing chapter is my interview with a member of the Church of Christ scientists. Have you guys heard of that group? They believe that you can heal anything with prayer. Anything. From a broken toe, which I have right now, to death. They believe that you can resurrect a human being from death via prayer. And so I interviewed this woman in their reading room, and this reading room, she said, was filled with evidence, books with evidence that they can do this, that they can actually resurrect people from the dead. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to get this stuff, I'm going to win the Nobel Prize for coming out with it. That didn't happen. So I met this woman, and I sat down, I started talking to her. She had several visible issues that I was asking her why you haven't sought prayer on these issues, including a cross eye, one of her eyes off to the side. And I just asked her why she hasn't prayed about it, and she just said it wasn't a priority. But she said she hurt her back once and prayed about that, and 2 or 3 days later, it was fine. And so I asked her to look at the evidence, and she's like, oh yeah, you're going to be really impressed. You like data, you like science, you're going to love this. Pick up a book and you'll see all of our evidence. And I'm like, okay. I open up to a random page and it says, John L. was cured of this disease by prayer on this day. Next submission. Jane F. was cured by prayer. I'm like, is there any other data? Well, no, these are testimonials and there are evidence. And I asked her if she knew someone who had been resurrected from the dead, and she said her sister's friend was, she thinks. I remember that she died and then she came back, so yeah, that happened. And I'm like, okay. So that was also a very fun one. Those are just a few of the things I talk about in the book, but it shows you the general types of issues that I deal with. But the book goes beyond that too, to teach you how to use these same issues, the same methods to dispel these myths and supernatural beliefs can be used in your daily life to do just about anything, to eliminate your own cognitive biases, to find truth in advertising, to choose where your money goes in your 401k. It's just incredibly important mindset to have. And so basically, that's the book. And if you want to know more, you can ask me now or come talk to me when I'm signing books afterward. Thank you, guys.
We got plenty of time for questions.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm ready for questions.
I just
That's my favorite part.
second microphone.
Nice. It's going to set you guys up.
Go ahead and take it in the front.
Cool.
Any questions? Raise your hand in the front. I prep a second.
Can I say a prayer that my ex-wife is gonna stay dead?
As you can all see, I'm part of Team Jesus, so I have the ins. I can make that happen. I think you had a question, sir?
Yeah, kind of a few things come to mind. So when you're at these, whether it's a Scientology or people with whatever they're flawed or
Sacred cow.
right, what's the
Speaking to the tiny microphone.
You want me to restate the question again for the?
Yeah.
Okay, so whenever you're at one of these, you're doing your research with a group or individuals that share a belief that you know, are showing that it's flawed, or at least trying to interact and engage with them. How often? What is the emotional dynamic between you and them? I mean, are they sort of sensing judgment, or are they feeling that you're accepting them? And how does that play out, and how many? That's part one of the question.
Definitely. It's always been part of my policy with interacting with people that I try to be as friendly as possible. I try not to cause problems. It ends up helping me a lot, especially in online discussions, because people are very disarmed by me not yelling back at them and not insulting them. So sometimes I'll get a message in all caps, F you, F this, you're going to die and go to hell and burn. And then I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, your feelings are hurt. I'm happy to help, though. Why don't you talk to me about what's going on? What triggered this emotional response? 9 times out of 10, they'll respond with something like, oh, I'm sorry, I overreacted, I got angry, I got emotional. Maybe that is something that I need to look into. So it kind of plants that seed of doubt. And I really try to do that in all of these investigations. I talk about in the book in one instance in which I was perceived negatively, and that was with the expensive $400 an hour psychic who, she was like, well, my reading won't work if you're a skeptic. And I'm like, okay, then it doesn't work at all. And so that was the one time I can think of where I was treated negatively, just because I admit all the time that I don't believe these things, but I also am open-minded and happy to talk to them. But she just knew I was just gonna do evil things, and so that got off to a rocky start. She actually canceled the meeting, even though I was paying her. She said, no, I'm not going to do it. And I was like, I called her and just said, hey, I know you probably had negative interactions with skeptics before, but I'm not here to hurt you or your business. I just want to talk to you and do a reading. And she's like, okay, fine. So I can usually end up disarming people by just being nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, other than...
Got another one over here.
Yeah.
Speak into the little mic.
Yeah, just adding on to what the other person was saying. What are most people's motivations for talking to you in the first place? I can see the one you paid, the $400 to, but why would the others even bother talking to you if,
Yeah.
what's in it for them?
Of course. In some of the instances, I go in as just an unknown patron. So when I went to the Scientology Center, they had no idea who I was, and I just came in and asked them to take their test. So they're looking to recruit me.
Yeah.
And they did try. They gave me their fake IQ test, and then they said that the results came back. My IQ, they said, according to their test, is not a real IQ test, said it was 186. And they said that you're so intelligent that you must be lonely and depressed in your life because you can't really interact with people in your daily life. And I'm just listening to them like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. But they just look for whatever in they can get. And I went with somebody who was clinically depressed, and so the answers that they gave alluded to that. And so they said, oh, you're depressed, you need our stuff, and you need our book. So in some cases, they're trying to sell something. In other cases, they're just good people. I mean, a lot of the people I talk to just are firm believers. One of the psychics, he was just a really good, nice guy. He thinks he has supernatural powers. He isn't trying to rip people off, in my opinion. And he was just hoping to learn more about himself. He said that being interviewed by a skeptic would give him a chance to prove himself and give him a chance to find out more about his powers. And so I don't know if that went the way he thought it would, but yeah, they have different motivations, but I find that most people are pretty cooperative in general.
Hi, David.
Hey,
I have more of a comment. I'm looking forward to bringing your book to work. I can confirm there's much more of a spiritual belief than necessarily a dogma religion belief. I get that from my coworkers at my post office, that the Bigfoot people, the UFOologists, I call them, the alien people.
Flat
I
earthers.
don't necessarily think there isn't alien life out there, but is there intelligent enough life out there to ask questions to realize about itself? But also the flat earthers too, and things like that. I'm looking forward to bringing your book to work and having pleasant conversations.
Thank you very much. And just so you all know, last night I was in Flagstaff, and some of the people there suggested during the Q&A session that flat earthers don't actually exist. It's like a conspiracy theory about a conspiracy theory. They say that all flat earthers are actually just trolling or joking or trying to get a reaction out of the general public. And as somebody whose sister is a flat earther and whose best friend since I was 5 years old is a flat earther, it's a very difficult position to be. I'm like, no, they exist. So come to my house.
What did they say about the satellite, like the pictures?
Fake news. Everything that contradicts the flat earth hypothesis is just fake. It's just,
all the pictures from
fake.
Hollywood.
All of it's fake. Yes, sir.
Hi, I totally share your viewpoint that that you should take a scientific approach. My question is, how come such a large chunk of our population doesn't? And if you look at it from an evolutionary point of view, why would that be that way?
It's actually kind of interesting because evolution is the reason that we are in the minority. First of all, when it comes to religion, evolutionarily speaking, it played a huge role in our development. Religion, people hate when I say this, especially at skeptical conferences, but I studied religion in college, and I can tell you that the earliest forms of religion were very helpful to our society. First of all, it helped them explain the unknown. Even if it's a false explanation, our minds crave answers, even if they're incorrect. They just want something to fill that void. But the second most important part from an evolutionary standpoint is tribalism. Religion brings people together, and then it brings them apart from the others that it has brought together. And so it creates these communities, and it also creates warring factions of communities. But that was something that historically was needed. And in addition to that, when it comes to skepticism, we are in the minority because, historically speaking, people who are most skeptical end up dying. They don't reproduce because they're going to hear a noise and they're going to go investigate it before anyone else, and they're going to end up dying. So the few people who end up being skeptics, they end up discovering something great maybe, and then they go on to live happy lives and reproduce, but then most of us did not in those evolutionary times, a long time ago. So today we're kind of dealing with the residual effects of that, and we're trying to adjust to a new reality where our brains are really meant to live in a paradigm. They're meant to just see what we're it makes things easier for our brains to process things if we kind of already know the answers. So if everything you've been taught since you were a kid is right, the world makes sense. If everything you were taught from being a kid was wrong, your whole world shatters, and we've seen that from a lot of people. We've seen that's why recovering from religion exists. It's why people have these cognitive dissonance moments when they're learning that the earth is not flat. I got to see it. My sister, a couple weeks ago, she came to my house and we started asking her questions about just opening up a map and like, okay, if you want to get from over here on this left side to over here on this right side, you think it should take days to fly there, right? But it doesn't. And so she was like, I don't know, I just think we should ask questions. And I'm like, well, I'm asking you a question, answer it. And so I think there are a lot of parts that come into play there, but evolutionarily we are in the minority, and I feel like we could change the tide on that, but it's going to be difficult because we have lots of ingrained in our genes saying not to be this way.
Very good. I hope you help us do that.
Thank you, I'm trying. Who do we got next?
What do you know about Seth
and what he says, and what do you know about automatic writing?
Seth Andrews? Seth what?
I'm sorry?
Who?
Seth.
There used to be a book
The
called
biblical?
Seth Speaks. Yeah, there was like
Oh,
Seth
the
Speaks.
automatic write. Okay, now it's
The automatic
I get
writing
it.
that Jane does, and then
Yeah, that's really
Seth
fun.
is, and some of his writings are really quite interesting.
Oh, of
And
course.
they don't, well, you know about them?
Yes, yeah. I think I touch on that in the book, not on that specific example, but on automatic writing in general. And it's really funny because Rachel, when I met her mom, was like, yeah, I'm with you on most of this stuff, but one time I wrote stuff and then it came true. And it's, in the most famous examples, it's pure fiction. It's somebody saying that they're automatic writing, that something is coming from another world, and it's literally just them creating this story. And it can be interesting and it can be compelling, but that doesn't prove anything about the supernatural. And it just proves that that person is incredibly creative. They might even have a sort of mental illness, as it were, that allows them to feel like they have two separate personalities. That's something that exists. And so if somebody was writing as that personality, they could snap out of it and say, oh my, what wrote this? A ghost must have taken over my hand and wrote this beautiful prose. And so it happens more often than you'd think where people do this and they think that that's something that's divinely inspired or inspired by a ghost or something else. But in every case, you can kind of look that there's no predictive quality like you look for in science. You can't look at any of these writings and determine, okay, well, this person wrote something that couldn't have been known by somebody else. It couldn't have been discovered before this time, and it's really groundbreaking. And so that's what I kind of look for. Same with psychic visions. I try to look for something that helps us as one of the psychics I talked to said that he predicted the Boston bombing. And he said, a week before the Boston bombing, I just couldn't stop writing Boston. I just couldn't stop writing Boston. And I'm like, okay, well, if it was a prediction of Boston bombing, first of all, you would have written Boston bombing, then you would have called someone, then you would have stopped it. None of that happened. Instead, in hindsight, he was like, oh, that must be what I was predicting at that time. And that's not how predictions work in science. And so try to stick to the scientific method on that. Thank you. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned the phenomenon of sleep paralysis.
Yes.
Another name for that is sleep, because think about it. When we used to sleep up in the trees,
yep,
if you weren't paralyzed, or shall we say unable to move,
yep,
you'd probably fall out.
Exactly.
And that's true of almost every mammal that sleeps.
Yep.
And it's when there's an overlap between the dreaming state, the paralyzed state, and semi-consciousness is when you get the phenomenon you were talking about.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, but at least I guess your anal parts were left intact.
Yes, exactly. It was not probed, which is good. Yeah, you're right. There's a mechanism in our brain that shuts down the body when we sleep. It's less prominent in dogs, who often end up running in their sleep and running into a wall. But in humans, it's especially strong. And some people have this disorder, including about 15% of the people in this room, that there's a broken trigger in between your sleep and wake. So your mind is dreaming, you're seeing dream state hallucinations, but your eyes are also open, or you're also, there are sleep and awake qualities. And so yeah, it's a disorder with the switch that switches in between that. So your body is paralyzed like you're asleep, you're dreaming like you're asleep, but you feel awake and you can see your room around you like you're awake. It's kind of scary if you don't know anything about it. And it helped me understand a lot of believers better, because they're like, no, I had this experience and you don't know. It was and I mean, when I had my experience, I didn't believe in any of this. I was already writing about skeptical issues. So when I saw a ghost coming at me, I was terrified. It's like, not only am I about to be eaten by a grudge ghost, but I'm also wrong. So that's worse.
Which is worse.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I have a story. I was once at a big fundraiser at an animal shelter I was volunteering with,
nice.
And it was like a festival. There was a woman there who claimed to be able to read the mind of dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And biscuits. I happened to be sitting at the table where she was interviewing some dog. And I was sitting next to the dog's owner, and I noticed, and this woman kept looking and looking, and she said, "I'm not getting anything." Well, I noticed that the dog's owner was not reacting in any way. And that was my clue.
Believe it or not, I actually touch on animal psychics in the book because there's this one prominent one in Los Angeles that she just recently got sued by a bunch of former clients who said that she was committing fraud when it came to her psychicism, and also she was not properly treating dogs in her care and other stuff. So it's an issue because people who can't be good enough psychics with people, can't be intuitive and pick up on these things, might resort to animal psychicry, I'm going to call it. And I feel like that just shows that they're, even more desperate because they can't do the real thing, so they're going to operate on something that can't tell you if you're right or wrong.
Yeah, but she was not able to read the...
Exactly. You can't read the owner, then you can't read anything. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I don't know if you wrote on near-death experiences, but that seems to be a recent trend. There was even a neurologist a couple of years ago, even Alexander, who died, went to heaven, then came back to write a book about it. And there's seems to be several books lately, that sort of thing. Not in surgery, seeing the light, coming back, all of that. Kind of a...
I did that.
It's an amazing topic because it's something that we don't know 100% about yet, but we can piece together enough to know that it's not a supernatural force. In the book, I go over every study that's ever looked at people with near-death experiences to see, again, their predictive qualities. When you have this experience, were you able to, mostly they study cardiac arrest, and they say when you had this near-death experience, were you able to, for example, they would put something on top of a shelf and say, are you able to identify the shape on top of that shelf? If you're floating above your body, you should be able to look around and identify a simple triangle or square. The results showed that nobody was ever able to predict anything at all from these experiences, but they had them. And that's true. I'm not debating the existence of near-death experiences. They certainly exist, and they're pretty common, surprisingly common. The general consensus in the scientific community is that it's another coping mechanism. It's something that when we are near death, instead of being in suffering, instead of suffering and being in agony and pain and thinking about our last moments, instead we're graced with this bright light that is more likely a chemical reaction flooding the brain than anything else. Yeah, and there are a lot of different variations on what they think, which chemicals react how and why, but I talk about all those different examples in the book, and then I interviewed Michael Shermer, who's pretty much an expert on that subject, and I do talk about that specific neurosurgeon and his experience quite extensively in there too.
You know what gives credibility to all that, in which, I mean, I find baffling is that you have this, what was he, Harvard-trained neurologist or something that wrote this book? I mean,
it's meant to give credibility, but it just proves that anybody can be susceptible to these false beliefs. Anybody can, I mean, he should understand how the brain works in these instances, but because probably he has some preconceived notions about religion, he fell into that. And the way that you can disprove these near-death experiences as something objective and supernatural is, I talk about in the book, you look at studies from places like India. When they have a near-death experience, guess who they don't see? Jesus. They see their deities. They see the things that they've been culturally implanted with. They see their memories that's associated with their particular religion. And even atheists, some of us, if we have a near-death experience, can see things like Jesus or God because of our culture, because we understand that that's what you're supposed to see. And so other people have said that they saw aliens when they had their near-death experience, and those people are generally people who really believe in aliens, and usually UFO hunters and stuff. So a lot like the sleep paralysis, where you can see ghosts or aliens or whatever some say it's divine, it's God coming to visit them in their sleep and stuff. So regardless, it just kind of plays out whatever their cultural preconceived ideas already are.
I heard over here a little joke that they see a white man with a big beard by the name of Charles Darwin.
I like it.
So my question is, and I'm just going to restate this to make sure that I'm understanding you, two of the points that you made.
Number one, you were saying that you believe that all false beliefs could potentially cause harm.
Yep.
And number two, you were talking about how, especially back maybe thousands of years ago, how religion was very helpful to some people.
That's true.
Now, taking those two things together, where in your analysis and your research and talking to people, where do you think the line is between false beliefs that are just false beliefs and false beliefs that are harmful? And the reason that I ask is because I think almost everyone has some type of false belief or superstition. So where in your research do you think that line is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to touch on the end of it first. We all do have false beliefs. I talk about in the book times, even in recent years, where I've been proven wrong about something that I believed with all my heart, and I believed it to be backed by evidence, and then I found out that I was wrong. And so that's really important part of all this, is to realize that we all have sacred cows. We all have something that, I try to just state as many random facts in the book that I hope to offend everyone with one thing. I hope that everybody who reads it finds one belief in there that they had, whether it's that we operate using only 10% of our brains or basically anything. You know, there are so many false beliefs out there that everybody does have one. When it comes to harm, I like to measure impact on other people and impact on the health of the individual. A lot of people say that Jainist people, Jains, are this ultimate example of religion because they're extremely peaceful, and they are. But because they're so peaceful, they won't even step on a bug that's in front of them. They'll brush it out of the way with a broom so that they don't harm any life. And you would think, you can't go wrong with that belief. That's great, even if they think it's divinely inspired. But the problem is that a lot of them end up dying of starvation because they won't eat anything that could potentially harm any animal. That includes they can't drink anything if they think a fly could get stuck in it. They really take this to a crazy extreme, so much so that women are treated as inferior beings in that religion because of the menstruation process. They say that kills things inside the body, making women inherently kind of toward that devil side of things as opposed to the divine. So false beliefs in general, I know people who are helped by their false beliefs. I know people who have gone through really tough times just by a belief in some supernatural power, and that hasn't negatively impacted them, hasn't negatively impacted anyone else. And so I really like to look at those factors, whether they are physically or mentally harmed by it, and whether other people are, which is when it becomes even worse, when it starts spreading out of their experience dome and into the worlds of other people where they impose their beliefs on others. That's when I can't stand it, and that's why I got into secular activism.
So I'm looking forward to reading your book, although it seems like it's going to be more depressing than I was hoping for. So
it has a happy ending.
I had the idea that humans were getting better at this stuff. You know, there's a lot of old beliefs. Did you find anybody in the world that still worships Zeus or believes in leprechauns and unicorns?
There are people, yes. There are also people who worship the ancient Greek gods still and believe that they exist and operate in our daily lives and affect people. I couldn't find anything that is completely extinct. There's always going to be somebody out there who's like,
that's what I was hoping for. I was hoping that these cows were going extinct, right? And I was going to ask the question about how do we move that frontier forward and make a few more of them die, or which ones are on the edge of going extinct and how you push them over the edge.
Well,
now I'm just totally bummed.
Speaking of pushing things over the edge, the flat earth belief is actually a really prominent one right now. And it's even more depressing when you realize that throughout history, no time in history has more people believed in a flat earth than right now. It's growing exponentially. Columbus, contrary to popular belief, knew that the earth was round, was spherical. People in ancient Greece knew that the earth was round. They could measure shadows and understand that basic concept. Today, more people per capita believe in a flat earth than at any time in history, despite having evidence and facts and science and pictures and a Tesla orbiting the earth. Despite all of this, they continue with this belief, and it spreads more and more. And the reason for that particular one and other things such as anti-vaccination beliefs, they have risen because of social media and because of popular culture, because of celebrity culture, because people who have no idea about the scientific method and about a lot of things rise to this crazy level of fame. They affect billions of people with their words, so all they do is tweet, well, yeah, the earth kind of does seem flat, you know, and then now they just spawned a certain number of new flat earthers just because these people look up to them so much, and it's really sad that that's the type of culture that we have, but that's what we're fighting against, and so we have to understand it in order to fight against it. Who do we got next? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, talking about beliefs, it's a question of whether you really believe it or whether you just say you do.
Yep.
Which is part of the problem. I mean, I think nothing of saying, oh, that's karma when something goes wrong, because it saves me from having to play back the old tapes of why did I do this and why did that or why that. So you just say, so it's karma and go on. Same thing with spirits. So the tree is alive and then they have a tree spirit. So what? I'm not hurting anybody. You wouldn't call that a belief.
No, if you're saying it just as cultural shorthand.
It's a useful tool, and I think a lot of people are using belief in that way, as long as they're not infecting other people.
Exactly, and that's definitely true. And things like karma, the belief in karma, is a shortcut in itself because you're trying to justify how terrible people can get away with things. You're like, okay, well, in their next life, karma actually means in the next life, when you're born into that life, you're going to be changed into a different creature depending on your level of moksha or your ability to garner positive feedback from the universe. And it's used in this new age sense of something happens, oh, that's karma. And that, I don't see a problem with that at all. And it's even more of a shortcut. It's just, don't want to factor in any of this, but that's karma, and you move on. And I don't take everybody seriously who says that, but there are people, obviously, who have that firm belief in that version of karma, where they think that somebody can't get away with something bad. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, but they do, and it's bad, and we need to address that, and we need to understand it before we can fix it.
How many more questions do you want to take?
I don't care.
All right, we got 3 lined up.
Cool.
One reason we'll never get rid of them as long as they're making money, and I would.
Yeah.
However, there are some really culpable entities out there. I mean, the ancient astronauts and the, people looking for Bigfoot, etc. And I think you're going to have some kind of like concerned scientist or whatever boycott, of their advertisers. And just say, you're part of the problem. You created fake news in a way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's very true. This society that we're in is also very, especially when it comes to the supernatural and false beliefs, including conspiracy theories that are false. It all goes back to these misleading documentaries. I mean, it's a very common process because all you do is state some facts, pepper in some facts that seem crazy, seem contradictory maybe, then you add some dramatic music, then you lie, then you make up things and make it sound like a question. Well, what if aliens did this? And you're like, but they didn't. And so, yeah, that's a really huge problem. And when it comes to Ancient Aliens, for example, I know that the producers of Ancient Aliens don't believe everything that they say on that show. It's not possible that they could be that gullible. But a lot of people are, and they take every word of that and believe it. And so, yeah, I think concerned scientists boycotting advertising is a good way to stop the capitalist aspect of that, which is responsible for so much of the spread, including Bigfoot documentaries, including all those types of things that generate millions and millions of dollars, including the alternative medicine industry, which people say is trying to take money out of the hands of big pharma. And I'm like, what about big natural medicine where they make so much money from literally killing people? Just recently I discovered, we were at Rite Aid, and I saw an all-natural inhaler substitute. It said if you have an asthma attack, you use this Himalayan pink salt crystal inhaler instead of a, quote, chemical inhaler. You suck on salt, and you're supposed to be cured. And so I wrote Rite Aid about it, and I asked them about that, and they're supposed to be getting back to me next week to kind of defend themselves, so we'll see how that goes. But I just can't see that as anything but deadly. I mean, I know people who have died from asthma attacks because they didn't have an inhaler. If somebody took that and said, well, you know what, I am against this sort of big pharma type thing, I'm going to throw away this inhaler and just go with the pink salt because I like my lava lamp that has that in it too. It's going to kill people, and so that's really dangerous, and I think concerned scientists should boycott.
Okay, so my daughter wanted to ask why do people believe in aliens? Like, why would these crazy, seemingly irrational beliefs be springing up if non-belief in like religion and dogma is going down? Is there like a correlation somewhere? Is there some other causation? And do you think it's related to education?
I think a huge part of this has to do with education. More generally, I think that people in the internet age are going away from doctrines, are going away from 1,000-year-old holy texts because they see that as inherently flawed. They see that as something that can't be true because it's so old and because it's something that we've poked holes in for years and years and years and years. And a good alternative when you need some explanation of the world, when you need to know that there's something bigger than yourself, when you need to feel so important that somebody is looking at you, whether it's a god or an alien, then that's a good substitute for a lot of people. I mean, not good in my opinion, but they use it. A lot of people, when they're transitioning out of religion, go to something like extraterrestrial intervention or even ghosts or psychics. They kind of serve this mediary role as well. So there are a lot of factors that go into it, but just in general, the feeling that the idea that aliens are visiting us is a good feeling to a lot of people, and there are things in the sky that sometimes people can't explain, and that lends credence to that. They'll say, oh, well, that's an alien then. I mean, obviously, they're going to fly around in our orbit, make some lights and noises, and then leave, because that was what we would do if we, no. So there are a lot of reasons, but that's really what I try to tackle in the book because it's such a complicated contradiction between the reduction in religion and the increase in other supernatural beliefs.
Stephen Hawking said we shouldn't make ourselves known to any potential aliens because they were probably more likely to harm.
If we learn from our own, yeah, he said that, Stephen Hawking said we shouldn't make ourselves known to aliens because they're more likely to have ill intents. And that's really true, especially if we look at our own society. When have we found a native people and not hurt them in some fashion? So I feel like that's reasonable advice from the late Hawking.
Along the lines of your statement that most false beliefs cause harm, my problem with karma is people who are taking this seriously are very likely to withhold help from people who have problems that could probably use some help.
Exactly, and that's when the karma belief does cause harm. And I've talked about before the issues with that, because when you see somebody suffering, somebody who's just been hurt in some devastating manner, if you're religious, if you're Christian, you might say that's original sin. That's part of your sin. That's something that you have to suffer for. If you believe in karma, you might say that's something you did in a past life. You have to suffer. It kind of comes into play in a lot of different beliefs, but that's a very common form of harm because they don't help those people, and then those people can go into further trauma.
So these will be the last two questions.
Cool.
I think I read in a book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, that the human brain is programmed to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when we're children, you know, it's to our benefit to listen to these adults that are taking care of us, and when they tell us stuff, to believe it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is that really the root of the whole problem, and is it just trying to figure out when you're supposed to mature enough to figure out how to not believe or something? Have you thought about that much?
Yes, definitely. In general, that is a huge part of the problem, and it goes back to our evolutionary roots. The reason that we have this desire to believe, and even atheists have this desire to feel something bigger. And when I was a kid, I would say, well, I believe in something up there, you know, I just don't believe in God. And I would say these things that don't really make much sense, but because I had that desire to believe. And that is something that is ingrained within us, and that's out of a desire to explain the unknown. It's imagine being one of our ancient ancestors, and you wake up one day, and the water that you need to survive falls from the sky. The food that you need to live grows out of the ground, walks around waiting for you to kill it. It feels like there's a God. It feels like there's someone who planted all that there, if you don't understand all the aspects, all the complicated surroundings of it.
Right up until the lion eats you.
Exactly. Exactly. And So historically, that makes a lot of sense to us in our brains. And as well, when you're talking about parenting, we're taught to trust our parents. It's natural to trust these people who have no reason to lie to you, and in many cases are not lying to you. They also believe these things, but it's our nature to believe people who we trust, who we love, who we are grown up with, and it takes a lot of work to drop that. I know a lot of you have probably experienced that, maybe later in life, or maybe in your when you left the house and you realized, oh, there are other belief systems. There are other people who believe just as strongly as my parents, but about different beliefs. And for me, that was a really eye-opening moment. Yes?
Okay, I really don't know that you would be able to answer this, but with your books, you're preaching to the choir. Is there any way that you have any idea as to how many people who are not like us buy your books, or is it just us?
Oh no, I actually have a lot of people who do believe in these things who get my book, and that's because it might be because they want to prove me wrong. It might be because they want to explore other beliefs. It might be because the fact that I had the publisher set it in the supernatural section of bookstores. But regardless of the reason, they might end up with that seed of doubt, and that's really all I look for, because nobody's going to have a lifelong belief and I just say, hey, you're wrong, and then they're like, oh, okay, and they walk away and they understand now. It's going to take multiple times, multiple interactions, maybe multiple years, but I feel like the book is a good place to start because it helps you more than just addressing these individual issues. I tried to instill an entirely new mindset of looking for evidence and applying the same standards of evidence to different beliefs, which a lot of people will change their beliefs, change how much they care about evidence depending on what the belief is. If it's something that they care very deeply about, they can't really have their mind changed regardless of what happens. They have to do that themselves. And if it's something else, they might say, well, no, psychics, I don't believe that, but ghosts, oh, definitely. And it's hard to see, but I try to teach people to use the same bar of evidence, and that kind of helps you avoid a lot of those pitfalls. So I don't have percentages, but a lot of people have read the book and told, like I said, everybody who's read it has said that they disagree with something. And since it's all scientifically peer-reviewed stuff, it should be fun to see what yours is. Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Well, what'd you think? Pretty good talk? Yeah. Let's give David another round of applause. So his book is for sale if you do want to buy it and see where you're wrong, and then get it signed as proof that you were wrong about something. You can come up and get an autograph. We are going to dinner. Brass Tap's over there. I have reservations. We got 3 tables, so please, you're welcome to join us. Yeah, if you could help clean up, kind of take anything that any cups and things, throw trash away in the back and put the cups in the bay. I could use somebody to help with dishes. And yeah, other than that, we'll see you at the restaurant. Thank you so much for coming. We'll see you next time.
Joining you guys.
Yeah, it's like that on my way. Yeah, it's not too far.
Very good.
Chris, did she say she could?
Hi, Al. Nice to meet you. Sharp. Yeah.
I could always use more hands.
Thank you. Yeah, me too.